Hey everybody, I am back from Washington, D.C., preparing to release a number of the podcasts that I recorded during my trip there last week. Two specifically, one will be out on Monday, as I mentioned in the previous video. Another will be out later in the week, focusing on Maria Butina, which the more I learn about Maria Butina's plight, the angrier I genuinely get, because it's just abhorrent. The way that she's been treated and the way that she's been scapegoated as essentially an excuse for the relevant law enforcement bodies failing to come up with any plausible arrests or indictments relating to the core Trump-Russia conspiracy, at least with respect to Americans. And Buttina's not even American, although she was, in America and arrested on American territory. So basically, she's just been scapegoated in the law enforcement machinations that went behind her ordeal, and that motivated prosecutors to treat her in this way is just despicable. Anyway, I'll get to all that later in the week. One thing I wanted to just briefly touch on is Joe Rogan. Breaking news: Joe Rogan endorsed Tulsi Gabbard last Wednesday live on one of his podcasts. And let me just read to you the phrasing by which Joe Rogan endorsed Tulsi. He said, quote, "Tulsi Gabbard's my girl. I'm voting for her. I decided. I like her. I met her in person. Fuck it." And let me also just play to you the actual video. I know it's not the greatest quality or whatever, but you can't be forthright with your evidence enough on the internet because people just don't believe you. So here it is.
What's that guy's name? What's his name? Oh, yeah. How do you say his name? Tulsi Gabbard's my girl. I'm voting for her. I decided. I like her. I met her in person. Who is it? I don't know. I give up. I'm not even paying attention to anything else. Tulsi Gabbard. What's that guy's name?
All right, you probably couldn't see that, but hopefully you could at least hear it. Or maybe you couldn't hear it because I just kind of stuck my phone at the... Oh, you know what? Hold on. You know what? This is amateur hour, so I'm just going to play it again into my microphone, which I stupidly forgot to do. You're not watching this video because of the high production values, hopefully, so just cut me some slack here. And yes, I do use this clip-on microphone for maximum dexterity.
What's that guy's name? What's his name? Oh, yeah. How do you say his name? You got it. Tulsi Gabbard's my girl. I'm voting for her. I decided. I like her. I met her in person. Who is it? I don't know. I give up. I'm not even paying attention to anything else. Tulsi Gabbard.
Okay, there you go. All right. So what are some of the reasons why Joe Rogan would endorse Tulsi Gabbard? And I do view that as an endorsement. Obviously, he's not going to put out a formal press release stating, I hereby endorse Tulsi Gabbard. But he's saying, I'm voting for her. I like her, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's pretty as close as you can get. Oops, sorry. Jeez. See, talk about amateur hour. Give me 1 second here. Okay, whatever. There we go. That's fine. I usually prop up my computer so I'm more in eyesight anyway. So here are some reasons why Joe Rogan would endorse Tulsi Gabbard. Number one, he had a long-form discussion with Tulsi Gabbard last September, I believe, last year, and was able to engage with her in a format other than this kind of soundbite heavy, attack frenzy, which is what most in the media have subjected her to. And Tulsi is better suited to a long-form format, which is what I did when I interviewed her in March on my podcast, which you can also see on this YouTube channel, because she has some complex views that aren't run-of-the-mill liberal or Democratic partisan. She comes from a conservative family background, a religiously conservative family background, and doesn't have some of the same priors as many fellow Democrats, meaning she didn't grow up affirming all the truisms of American liberalism because she was indoctrinated with them, or because that was the environment in which she was inculcated. She came at it all from a different angle, and also people get confused by her seeming rhetorical conservatism, meaning she's very reserved, she's calm, she doesn't do talking points generally. She doesn't lapse into this kind of overheated resistance rhetoric. And people automatically construe that as somehow meaning that she's a stealth right-winger or something. But on a policy level, virtually everything that she advocates could be considered pretty recognizably left. But the thing is, she doesn't really care for labels. And I know a lot of people don't care for labels. And sometimes they use that as an excuse not to kind of identify themselves ideologically. But in her case, I think it's true because it's actually borne out in her rhetoric and her policy positions. And in terms of the rhetoric, I mean, she does speak in a tenor of affirming her love of country, right? Which is more popularly associated with the right or conservatives, although liberals do it too. But she's doing it from the standpoint of her firsthand experience serving in the military and serving in Iraq on 2 tours. I mean, she was in a medical unit in Iraq where she was actually treating her friends who had endured extreme physical injuries and died in some cases. And the way she actually talks about that is really touching. Hopefully she'll actually be able to get a chance to go into more detail about that, because her overall mannerisms are can sometimes come across as a bit detached, because she's not emotive. She's not, it's just not her natural tendency to be screaming and to, shouting rah, rah, rah and that kind of thing. But in terms of emotional resonance, one thing she does do extremely well is talk about her military service. And I think she'll talk more about that at some point. So, keep on the lookout for that, because it's not phony. I mean, it's actually, she was there, she experienced it, and that's what's informing now her policy positions, namely on foreign policy, but also it has a connection to domestic policy as well. And I think that's actually, having a more left-oriented policy platform, but coupling that with conservative-ish rhetoric around, being pro-America and loving your country and wanting the best for it. I think that's actually a very positive recipe for getting maximum traction amongst the American people, because that's kind of what they want on some level, or at least, a majority, I would wager. But so why is it significant that Joe Rogan endorsed her? Well, I mean, I don't have to tell you guys that Joe Rogan has a hugely influential platform. It's kind of like Johnny Carson on steroids for the YouTube era. He doesn't often wade into electoral politics as such. I mean, he talks about Trump and stuff all the time, but he's not it's not his instinctive inclination to be endorsing candidates. So when you have somebody who's outside the electoral political arena entering it and making an endorsement, that actually has a big impact, because he has an audience that's not necessarily tuned in to every day-to-day development of electoral politics or the presidential cycle or that kind of thing. I mean, that's why politicians seek the endorsement of entertainers or athletes or that kind of thing, because it exposes them to a different audience than would normally be attuned to the daily happenings of a presidential campaign. And so I mean, it's actually a big deal. I'm not saying that Tulsi Gabbard is therefore a top-tier candidate right now. I mean, she's still relatively low in the polls, but she's gaining traction. I mean, there's a lot of support for her on the internet, which you can dismiss if you want, but Trump had a lot of support on the internet, and he had other support coming from other angles as well. But still, the huge social media support for Trump was, I think, actually an important factor in why he gained traction within the Republican primary, especially, and then even arguably in the general election. So there was a CNN poll last week that showed Tulsi tied at 2%, granted, but it showed her tied in a national poll with Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar, who are treated as top-tier, somewhat, candidates, and they get all the media attention and exposure that comes with that. Yet Tulsi is constantly denigrated and dismissed and cast as a weirdo or an oddball. Nate Silver, the data genius of 538, his website published an article, I guess you would call it, in January, kind of categorizing all the Democratic candidates, and the category under which they put Tulsi was oddball. So if she's such an oddball, why is she now tied, at least according to this one poll, with Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar, who are seen as, eminently serious candidates? I don't know. You should ask Nate. I'm sure, in order to come up with that analysis, he assembled like a team of 600 computers and data scientists and, charts and all that very complicated and impressive stuff to render that judgment. But I don't know. Ask him. So why else would Joe Rogan like Tulsi? Well, she enthusiastically, or rather, steadfastly rejects the cynicism of modern identity politics. I talked about this with her in my podcast interview. She would have standing to invoke the identity card because she's a minority woman, racially and religiously, and I guarantee you has incurred some treatment at times that attempted to diminish her on account of her being a younger woman in Washington, which is not entirely common, if you see what I'm saying. So she would actually have grounds on which to play the identity card, but she just doesn't do it on principle because she doesn't like it. She has a principled objection to it because she sees how cynically it's leveraged, especially in the media, to generate clicks and outrage and, ratings and all that. She doesn't like the easy way out in that respect. So even you had the Women's March, the official Women's March Twitter account recently, they hosted some kind of forum with the presidential candidates about, issues relating to women of color, and the official Twitter account for the Women's March tweeted out like a condemnation of Tulsi because she didn't actually use the exact phrase "women of color," even though she is herself a woman of color, which is just insane. So, which is all to say, she doesn't benefit from the plaudits of ticking these identity boxes that other candidates are, meaning they benefit from ticking those boxes, because people have other criticisms of her that they use to override whatever, identity criteria she satisfies. So that's just all to say that obviously it's so cynical, and it's not tethered to any kind of principled devotion to elevating women of color. It's all about what your political views are, and can you find a vehicle to promote those political views who meets certain identity criteria like female, woman, whatever. The other thing is she's also a veteran who served in a war, which, on paper, Democrats should love because they always want to appeal. They always want to invoke that kind of stuff to appeal to the broadest possible audience. Well, she has that, but they don't like her. So you tell me why that is. And then also, importantly, and I don't know that Joe Rogan is necessarily hugely into this issue in particular, although I heard him talk about it at times, is that she's the only Democrat still with a rational perspective on the Trump-Russia debacle. Still, now. So when asked, does she support impeachment of Trump on the grounds of Russia? She just says no. There's no ambiguity there. She says she does not support that. She thinks it's a distraction. Trump should be defeated electorally or politically. Well, he could be defeated politically, technically, through impeachment, but you know what I mean. She means that he should be defeated at the 2020 election, rather than latching on to these distractions and whipping up, a frenzy and causing conservatives and Trump supporters rightly to think that their democratic will is being undermined by Democrats who want to impeach him on the grounds of a hoax. So that's what Tulsi says, whereas every other candidate's like, oh, maybe we have to have a discussion about impeachment. Some actually do outright support it, like Elizabeth Warren. I saw Beto just today says that, they kind of wiggle their way out of it their way out of like having a firm position, because Beto said something to the effect of, we have to support the House in their pursuit of impeachment. So he's not actually saying, let's impeach Trump. He's saying, let's support the process by which Trump would be impeached. So it's like a distinction without a difference in a way, but, you could put Beto roughly in the pro-impeachment camp now. Seth Moulton basically endorsed it. Again, a minor candidate, but a moderate, so to say. And there are others. But Tulsi just says no. Wow, imagine that. It's just a straight answer. And she also has criticized just the underlying logic of the entire Russia affair. I mean, she put out a tweet a while ago now saying that it's so ridiculous for Democrats to be continuing to be called Trump Putin's puppet when he's taking policy actions that directly contravene Putin's interests, including in Venezuela, where there's like a proxy war going on right now between the United States and Russia. Not a hot war, but a proxy war, which was a feature of the Cold War. I mean, most of the time, the Cold War did not lead to the outbreak of direct military hostilities, but there was always this, what's the term for it? This, power struggle kind of going on between the U.S. and its allied forces and the Soviet Union and its allied forces. That's kind of what's going on in miniature right now in Venezuela, because Venezuela is the closest ally and the most important ally of Russia in the Western Hemisphere. And Tulsi says, no, we can't be involved in this new Cold War. And the Trump-Russia hysteria plays into it. And she's also saying, we're not going to run around screaming collusion when Mueller just did a 22-month investigation and basically concluded no collusion. And people always, yell at me, Mueller didn't actually find no collusion. You're lying. No, and I actually talked about this with Benjamin Wittes, who's like the preeminent, quote-unquote, expert on all of this, who agreed with me that Mueller did, in fact, investigate collusion. And we know this because in the scope memo issued by Rod Rosenstein, who was the Deputy Attorney General who had jurisdiction over the investigation, Rosenstein directed Mueller to investigate collusion. Rosenstein used the word collusion, and Mueller cited that in the report. So according to Benjamin Wittes and me, and we're on different sides of many aspects of this issue, but we both agree that Mueller did investigate collusion. Okay, so just get that through your brains, and that's coming out on Monday, so you can listen to it in great detail and understand why that's the case. So Tulsi just says, we did an investigation on collusion, just as you people said that you wanted. Mueller said no collusion, and now you're saying we still have to impeach Trump on like vaguely collusion-related grounds? No, not happening. She doesn't support that. So I think that honesty and forthrightness actually appeals to somebody like Rogan. Rogan's like characterized as a bro, which he obviously kind of is. But he's a smart bro in a way, and he's also characterized as being some kind of like a sexist or whatever. But I guess endorsing a woman will have no effect on that image. Anyway, you could talk to him more about that if you want. So that'll do it for now. Be on the lookout, like I said, for the stuff coming up this week, and I'll talk to you later.